anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country.
Georgian townhouses on the moon.
The highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way.
Small modular reactors under every village green.
This is Anglo-Futurism.
Hello and welcome to the King Charles III Space Station. I'm Tomo.
And I'm Calum Drysdale. Listeners, we are ashamed to tell you that the station is not in a good way. Over the last fortnight, we've been barraged by micro-meteors and orbital debris.
The station is a mess. The facade is cracked. One of the upstairs mullioned windows got broken, and the sign was so badly burnt it now reads Carly. Despite his man of action persona, Calum's attempts at repairs only managed to increase the damage.
Pal's help was no use. I just made things worse. And tragically, supply chains on Earth are clogged up, and no one can get us high-performance Cotswold stone in under 6 months.
That is why we have called in emergency help. When all looks lost, Alex Fitzgerald heard our SOS and has come up on Thunderbird 3. Alex, who is building a constellation of high-performance, high-precision factories, you are our only help. Thank you for coming so quickly.
I'm here to help.
Welcome to the King Charles III Space Station. Well, let's set the scene. You are helping restore our pub, but in the interim, we've popped down to your factory in northwest London on Eldon Way. It's only 25 minutes or so by car from Hyde Park. It's very central, and listeners can't see it, but we're in this big warehouse with a unit in the middle under a flag. Alex, what is the unit?
So this unit is where the future of British manufacturing will be generated from. The real problem that the West faces right now is that the supply chains for kind of large industrial businesses that you know the names of in aerospace, in defense, in energy, they don't actually do the manufacturing. They actually rely on a long tail of often small family-owned businesses, which are the actual manufacturing base. So take a specific manufacturing process like CNC machining. 95% of all CNC machines are owned and operated by a small business. So the existential threat we face in the UK, but also in Europe and North America, is that all of those small businesses are retiring now, and we're losing that capacity just as demand is increasing.
And what does CNC stand for?
Well, my brother thinks it stands for something else. So there's
yes, I've heard that there are some other initials.
But it means computer numerical control. So think about, take it back to like a sculptor carving out of stone. That's effectively what we're doing, but instead of a hand holding the tool, it's a robotic arm holding the tool very steadily and very accurately, and you carve really complex shapes out of blocks of metal. Now that started as just obviously a hand, then it went on to a motor driving that engine, then it went on to not just being able to do it at one specific angle, multiple different angles, and that's what we have here. We have 5-axis milling machines where you can essentially machine complex parts all within one operation and really efficiently.
And you opened you got the lease on Christmas Day last year, and you opened the factory in January.
Yes, exactly. And so our core thesis is the old model of building large centralized factories just takes too long, takes too much spending from one single business, and also it's just really hard to hire really great talent. So what we're building is a network of much smaller factories, not just here in London, but eventually across the UK as well. And so, there's this great there's a good movie about the founding of McDonald's, and it talks about every American town has a church, a courthouse, an American flag, and then the pitch for this McDonald's guy, Ray Kroc, was that the McDonald's sign was the fourth sign of an American town. For Britain, it will be an Isembard machine shop.
An Isembard machine shop with one of these things. And I just want to describe the unit a bit more. It's about the size of a van's sort of back section. There's a window, and I was here on the launch, and you can sort of see the machinery moving around. And Alex was telling us before we started recording that this is a second-hand unit from Rolls-Royce. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. The problem often when you've got the businesses we think that actually do manufacturing, most of the time they don't actually do huge amounts of the actual manufacturing. They may do some of the assembly of a product, but actually, if you take a factory line that you see all these parts moving in and being assembled. Those parts have to come from somewhere. And it's that like hidden supply chain, which is actually our manufacturing base. And it's actually where, if you get any announcement for any large factory announcement, the impact on the supply chain is 10 times the amount that specific factory impacts.
So it's because there is this sort of tree or sort of root in the system of, you say these are small producers, and you have effectively aimed to scoop these up and say, right, we're going to do this faster, higher efficiency, quicker, and get parts to Formula One teams, defense companies, rocket companies faster.
Yeah, exactly. So manufacturing, I think the problem with manufacturing technology or manufacturing startups previously has been people have been obsessed over method as opposed to output. They might have invented a new way of laser arc additive or a new type of manufacturing method, and they try to apply that method to every single process. It doesn't work that way. Fundamentally, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways to manufacture, but there are some principal ones, and those are machining, so where you take a block of metal and shape it down. There's additive or 3D printing, where you build it up. There's injection molding, where you spray a mold into a cast. There is wire harnesses where you connect wires, where there's the actual assembly itself. So there's a huge smorgasbord, and each of those different manufacturing methods has a supply chain. And so what we're saying is actually if you build a network of much smaller factories, but crucially for us, build software across those factories to make them run efficiently, that's how you can actually solve the problem of not just our supply chain, but then eventually building much bigger products as well.
And I think the decline or even death of British industry has been announced multiple times.
Yeah, it's like that. What's that Monty Python? It's the knight who never gives up.
Yeah. Wait, the Black Knight? It's merely a flesh wound, and potentially you are the regrowing, the sort of lizard's tail, which is growing back the limbs of British industry. Is that how you see it? Do you see this as like stopping the descent, or do you think we're actually at the beginning of a new, to use a French word, renaissance?
I think it's both. I think the descent is a psychological problem. The UK, who knows that the UK has the second largest aerospace manufacturing market in the world, behind the US. And that's largely because it's companies like Rolls-Royce or BAE Systems, etc. But it's actually then there's a tier 2, tier 1, tier 3, tier 4 supply chain. So I think it's more, the problem with Europe and the UK so far has been a lack of ambition and risk-taking fundamentally. There's a British way of going about it. You don't have to be all American about it and like start selling, being overselling. But actually, there's a British third way where you can actually have really huge ambition. And really, the reason why the business is called Isembard is because the Industrial Revolution started here. We've got huge amounts of heritage. We've got huge amounts of talent coming through universities. We've got huge amounts of software and AI talent. And like there's you've probably seen it in some of your listeners, but there's a sea change going on in terms of where the best engineers want to spend their time. They don't want to go work for a hedge fund pricing dollar pound, or working in a consultancy or a traditional business. They actually want to work on really important things, whether that's for defense, whether that's green energy or anything else.
Well, something like this is true for you, right? You founded a broadband challenger, Cuckoo, and you sold it to Giganet in 2022. Maybe you could have had a comfortable life. You could have stayed in telecoms, and yet we're in this warehouse of yours with a camp bed on the floor where you've been sleeping over Easter weekend. What pushed you to swap fiber optic lines for chips and lathes?
It's a good question. I think everything you have context, like, and there are so many like bubbles or like communities in the world you don't know about. So I didn't know anything much about manufacturing when I did science at university and biochemistry, but then
a very good choice.
Yeah. Fellow biochemist, good. So yeah, I started the broadband business, and that was my first business. Learned a huge amount, and thankfully managed. We kind of had a great partner on the acquisition. It was Giganet, but that was part of the wider Octopus family, and they're putting a lot of money and time and effort behind scaling the business. But I'd say after the acquisition, it was in that ideas maze about kind of what to do next. I'm still relatively young. And
how old are you?
32. I've forgotten.
But I noticed, listeners, he's kept his hat on though too.
I am balding. That's right. This is a recent invention.
It's a sign of very high testosterone.
But like you say, you're a young man. You're a scrap of a thing. Running a factory in a world where the average factory owner, I should say, is 65. Do you feel like a generational interloper or the vanguard of a bigger wave?
There is a wave happening right now. But equally, like the funny thing is, you'd think that as a new business with kind of the average age in our business of around probably in the late 20s, you'd think that the traditional industry, when we go and meet them, would be kind of putting up guards and putting up walls, but actually, like, they know that it's almost, they recognize the problems themselves. They see the like other machine shop down the road that they've worked with for a while or subcontracted some work out to, which is shutting down, and like they also want to solve the problem, because the problem with most of these subcontract shops is they're really good businesses, but they're stuck in a localized area and no one knows about them, and they find it really hard to actually like attract the best talent as well. So why would you go to, I don't know, Joe's Precision Engineering Limited in like Merthyr Tydfil versus apply to Mercedes or Rolls-Royce? It's these kind of, it's like a brand problem as well, which I think that people in Europe underestimate, and which is why the power of storytelling is so important, and how it attracts not just talent but also capital as well. Because fundamentally, in the early stages of the business, it's less about like someone wiser than me once said, there's like two types of like fundraise for a business. There's a vibes round or an Excel round, and as you get bigger and bigger, you have to transition from one to the other. But yeah,
you just got £7 million of funding. So
that was definitely Excel. That was definitely
Excel. He's shaking his head.
Yes, and we actually know some people who invested in Isembard do listen to this.
What was that friend of the show, Harriet Green?
Oh yeah, no, Harriet. Yeah, she's great.
Exactly. Yeah. So Harriet, close your ears now.
It was an Excel.
Before we press on, listeners, you might notice the skirl of whatever machine is in the next warehouse. So our apologies for that. Alex, as you were saying, there's a generation of machine shop guys who are retiring, dying out, and Mason OS, which is your proprietary operating system that operates the unit. How does it capture tacit know-how before those veterans hang up their overalls? Are you literally recording their tool pods or hiring them as digital sensei or what?
I like the term digital sensei. Fundamentally, it's not about replacing, it's about like augmenting. And so where you have maybe one machinist having to operate one machine, actually 10 timesing that, so you can actually have one machinist operating multiple machines. Because the real problem with this, those small businesses is loads of the software and technology built is not really built for them. And it's built software that's been built in the 70s or 80s. And often you'll go into a shop and they'll be excited about the fact that they paid £50,000 for a software consultancy to build them something, when if you actually look under the surface, it's just an Excel sheet which they pull together to enable them to quote better to customers. So it's like a really broken industry in that sense, but also it's not just software to run our factories, but also the interface with our customers as well. Because another thing that's the problem in building products, and what you're seeing, like if you look in what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, it's software and hardware development needs to have a fast iteration cycle. Like the actual product needs to then be fed back into the design of the performance needs to be fed back into the design of actually manufacturing the product as well. And that's where we're spending a lot of time also in building technology to integrate with our customers, so that we can then give feedback for design to manufacturing. So that maybe if you made the little shape of the internal radii or of a pocket in a kind of a part we make a bit different, then that would halve the cost and halve the time it takes to manufacture that part. So essentially it's trying to be that, turn hardware development into what software development is like.
And I suppose actually, as you say about these small shops, what you're doing is you're bringing software to these shops, right? So almost you are a software business in that you're taking what has been done for a while, and rather than outsourcing that to that £50,000 software consultant, you're saying, right, we'll just do the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. We are a software first business, like really built. That's why we have more software engineers than machinists in our business. And 95% of our team are engineers at the moment. So yeah, exactly. But I wouldn't discount the fact that this is I think there's also a failure mode in most manufacturing businesses where people obsess over automation, but automation is actually should be the fifth stage of an algorithm where you come to at the end. You actually need to make the requirements less dumb. You need to simplify and optimize, accelerate cycle time.
Automation at this point looks like you sleeping on the camp bed and swapping out.
Yeah, I am a robot to the Isembard machine.
And on a recent episode of this podcast, Douglas Carswell slammed diversity hires and performative ministers. So we'd like to know what your hiring litmus test is for a microfactory engineer. Is it welding certs, Git commits, Brunel quotes?
All of those, plus. So the way we think about it is just having an insanely high bar for the engineering talent we bring in, and never letting up that bar, and actually increasing that bar every time we bring someone new in. And so the first thing we do when someone starts, or even after they've signed their employment agreement, is who are the 1 to 3 engineers or operators you've worked with in your entire life that it would be a dream for you to work with again. And then we go and incentivize people to go and find those people to then join Isembard. And that's when all of the team has been hired through Network. We haven't spent one penny on any recruiter. So that's the bar. And I think day one of starting an Isembard is you make your own desk. So
I was going to ask about any amateur engineering projects. Talk us through the desks.
Well, yes, you just arrive on day one. Your laptop's there, but you've also got an unassembled desk, an unassembled chair, and then that's your first job. Make your own desk.
Well, I did see up in the office there are a few bean bags. Is that for the people who don't manage it?
Yes, that's when you collapse because you've machined too many parts and you need a break.
I think a lot of people talk about like what the difficulties of running a factory in Britain and doing would this count as heavy industry? I suppose it is heavy industry, right? And the thing that they often bring up are industrial energy prices. As someone who is actually doing the work and is not just on Twitter mouthing off about it, what's your experience of the challenge of high energy prices? And if it's not that, what are the constraints, like the real limiting forces on more businesses the ascent of Isembard? What are the things slowing you down?
Yeah, so I mean, if you ask a traditional machine shop, what are your biggest pain points? The two biggest things are revenue predictability and hiring talent. Energy costs come somewhere low down. So I think it's an internet meme as opposed to actual kind of context. Now, that depends on the type of manufacturing you're doing. So if you're doing forgings or castings where you need to have a huge amount of energy to actually heat up material, then it becomes a different story. But most manufacturing processes, if you distribute it in the right way, there are energy requirements, but it's just you price that into the cost you give your supplier. What actually needs to be solved is finding customers and finding talent. Those are the two most important things. And the problem with most small subcontract shops is that they may have 1 or 2 big businesses as their main customers. But if one drops or for some reason they can't supply them, then kind of the business is at real risk. So energy cost is one, I think. But I think, again, I could come back to it. Like, everything it's a mental problem at the moment that we need to overcome. And it's a mental problem of opining and analysis as opposed to action. Like, it's the classic thing. feedback beats a plan any day of the week. Like actually going out and the things that we've learned from actually setting up a factory that, like for example, air compressors, that takes a lot of time to get an air compressor into a factory. It's not something you would have like learnt about on building a Gantt chart and spending months putting together an Excel spreadsheet.
Which you have done.
Which we have done. So it's a mental model that needs framing, and it's like a mental model of about doing stuff in the real world and reacting based on the data you actually collect.
Thanks, Alex. I will hand over to Calum to ask about Western industrial decline.
I mean, obviously, at the moment, you say that a lot of these people who would be machining are retiring. So actually, this is maybe less of a problem. But it's been said that robots destroy jobs in countries where people don't use robots, right? Is your model that actually by having this be highly automated, you're allowing people to be more effective and then be able to have more people working in this area?
Yeah, exactly. I think take the model of, let's say, a business like McDonald's. The way to think about McDonald's is actually a manufacturing business. All of the McDonald's restaurants are fundamentally process generation, assembly plus performing heat treatment on a supply chain of parts. Yet you still see a huge amount of people in a McDonald's, and they're revenue generating machines, profit generating machines. Yet there is automation, often on the customer end in terms of the point of service like ordering. There's automations on some of the production end, but actually like there's still a path for humans, and we're in no way near a world in which you've got fully lights out factories producing high mix, high volume of parts and assembling of products for customers. So it's definitely like technology is a superpower, and as with anything, it's not the kind of strongest. It's those that are most amenable to change, which will be the ones, and we've got to just be flexible to kind of the future.
And I suppose part of that, you talked about that sort of virtuous cycle of feedback, but I suppose there's also a virtuous cycle, as you say, that machine shops are not confident about their revenue, and part of that is because companies like BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce are not ordering in large enough orders that you can sort of predict forward and be able to say, right, well, I've got this order for the next year or 2 years, and that's going to guarantee revenue for that long. Is that part of the problem? And actually, do you think that by lowering the cost of the parts that you're producing, actually you can allow these companies, these bigger companies, the one that people have heard of, to kind of be more productive and then offer goods at a lower price?
Yeah, so we're effectively we're the subcontract manufacturer for not just fast-growing startups, but the larger primes, as well as government as well eventually. Now, each of them have their own problems, but equally those are customers you need to work with. Now, actually, they are producing large amounts of product over time, and often you find shops where they've financed 6 machines because one large customer has put in that you've done some prototyping of parts for that customer, and then they want to move that into production. And
they're happy with what you've done. So
exactly. And that order volume of, let's say, 1,000 or tens of thousands of parts over the next 6 to 12 months is enough for you to finance a new machine. So, again, it's a problem of who does what in a machine shop. Often these machine shops are really isolated. They'll employ about 10 to 20 people, but employ no one trying to manage relationships with customers. That will just be the person running the business. But also the pain points for a larger primer there as well. They have to not just sell into, if this is on the defense side, sell into government. They need to be building IP and products. They need to manage their own supply chain, which is, if you look at if BAE stopped doing work today and did no more sales, they still have an order book of about, I think it's about 60 billion or a large number of billions, and a depth of a supply chain of about 30,000 businesses across all different parts. So it's a real challenge for them as well. But we think we can be that like salve for not just newer businesses, but some of the bigger ones as well.
And I think it's interesting, as you say, that is a huge supply chain, a lot of it being in Britain. Why do you think we don't recognise ourselves as clearly the engineering and manufacturing, I think maybe somewhat tongue in cheek, but superpower that we are, right? We have F1 out around Milton Keynes. We have BAE Systems. We do aerospace. You said
Rolls-Royce, amazing company.
Rolls-Royce. What is the like British reluctance to boast? And is it, as you say, it's these small shops who are not willing to sort of put themselves out there and do the...
I think they don't have a voice, is one, and we want to be that voice for them as well. I think there's the natural part of the British character to be understated. There is, there has been like pockmarked history of British industry. You had, if you go back to the history of Park Royal, we had Park Royal was, and it still is, a huge manufacturing. It's the last great manufacturing set area in London. Lot in food manufacturing, but in others as well. But you had, just one example, the world's largest toy factory in London during the Second World War, and then during the war, it transitioned to making Sten machine guns. Old train.
Not get the orders mixed up.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit.
I don't know. I think as a 7-year-old, I would have been delighted with a Sten gun.
So yeah, I think it's a cultural thing, but it's also, there's a really good article by I think it was a guy called Matt Clifford, who was the founder of Entrepreneur First, and it's I think it was about the history of ambition. And so if you go back in history, if you were really ambitious as a young person, you'd go into the clergy, because that's where you could learn to read and write and reason and logic. Then it transitioned to the military during the Napoleonic Wars, because that's where you could ascend faster the social hierarchy. Then it became finance and law in the professions during post like the 60s, etc. Then maybe after the internet boom, it became startups. But I think then everything goes in cycles and everything changes. And I think now, as I said before, the most ambitious engineers, investors, journalists, everyone actually sees like there is diminishing capacity of just like pushing pixels on a screen and building software to make, I don't know, I refer to it in our manifesto, but like making HR software or payroll software 10 basis points more efficient. Is that really a good use of your time? There are like massive problems to solve in the world, and you have the agency to solve those problems. And I suppose it's like that's what I'll be calling for the next kind of many years. You have an agency to solve those problems. Just go out and do it.
One of the most interesting phenomena in politics at the moment, I think, is the coming together of Silicon Valley and at least the Republican side of politics in the US. And perhaps this is partly prompted just by hard geopolitical reality. Do you see any concomitant effects in the UK?
I think, as with anything, change is good, and I think the cycle of new politicians or MPs coming into kind of parliament is a good thing, and like lowering the average age. Like a couple of weeks ago, I got a Calendly link from an MP, which I thought was cool. So I was
Which
like,
one?
okay, it's no comment. The Isembard lobbying campaign has already started. No, so I think there is an appreciation that like people see what the actual technology businesses can produce and can build. Whether it's, I think a simple thing. I think you haven't had like for a while before ChatGPT, like that technological change which was so powerful that you kind of noticed it. The last great change was the internet, and so like I think that's a good wake-up call for people that like technology is changing, and the next one is what Isembard is saying is actually manufacturing is there to be solved.
And I mean, on that topic, if you are talking to MPs and the dark world of lobbying has already caught you, is buying British then a sort of useful thing? Would you think that it would be good? I mean, you've got a big union flag up on the wall here, sort of larger than me, I think. Tall.
Hampshire Flag Company, if you want to know.
Oh well, there you go. If you ever want a a flag large enough to, I don't know, cover your whole house, then go there. But would you say that it'd be a good thing to say, right, but let's buy British? Or actually, do you think it'd be a good thing to say buy British, or do you think that obscures the need to sort of pursue productivity, like let's win on our own terms? Or do you think there's a need for companies to say, right, we're going to do our patriotic duty?
Yes, you need to do the patriotic duty in critical industries, because that's where you're building kind of defensible products, where if that IP is in any another country, that's a vector of attack. So, for example, all our machines can't be connected to the internet, because if often these machines are using quite outdated software when they're delivered to you to run them, and so that's a vector of attack for a foreign government or kind of other organization.
Well, that's what happened with Stux now, right? That the Iranians got done because they were using old Siemens software.
Exactly. So often software can be a real like vector of attacks. But I think the reason why we're focusing specifically on critical industries first is that's where you actually had domestic manufacturing protected in some ways because of those problems, but that in itself has created the problem of almost like an ossified industry which needs changing. But actually, like, if you can start and solve critical industry manufacturing, then everything else, like if you look at the supply chain for an Apple iPhone or a laptop, I think Apple has the largest amount of CNC machines in its supply chain of any other business in the world. Like the machining the mold for your AirPods, that's machined and then injection molded. The actual machining of your kind of laptop right here, that's machined parts right there. So it's about building a niche, as with anything. What's that like? There's a famous US investor who's like, how you build a big business is find a niche with really low NPS, vertically integrate to build a simplified product, and that's how you kind of can solve big industries.
Alex, you've twitched your skirts at the listeners by saying that you make things for critical industries. What are you making? Come on, tell us.
Well, and if your factory stopped, what parts of UK defence would collapse?
This is a roundabout way of asking who are our customers, isn't it?
and what are you making, and how many people could the weapons kill in one moment?
So we make, we're a subcontract manufacturer for critical industries, and that's defense, aerospace, energy. If you look, and we're especially focused on defense, but we're also doing some energy businesses as well. If you look at the trend of where defense is going, you're moving away from these traditional kind of 10-year programs with 2 years of design and then 5 years of planning and then actually elongating timelines. What you're actually moving towards is the military loves acronyms. So there's an acronym it's called SUMS-H, about where the future of defense technology is going, and that's small and cheap, unmanned, many, smart, and heterogeneous. So there's going to be lots of them, and they're going to be smaller and cheaper than like billion-pound aircraft carriers. They also need aircraft carriers. There'll be many of them. They'll be unmanned. They'll be smart, but also, crucially, there'll be lots of different types. So you're not just going to have like one type of drone, and then that's going to be millions of them. It's going to be a zoo of different things. If that's where the future is going, our supply chains aren't built for that. And what you need is a much more flexible supply chain where you have a faster iteration cycle. But yeah, so we're working with defense customers in the UK and Europe. And yeah, that's a long way of saying I didn't answer the question.
Long way of saying, close your mouth, none of your beeswax. Although I have to say, I will say that upstairs in the office when I was in the factory on Earth, I did see the part of a robot arm that was going to go on to protect it. So that's maybe a flavour, if I'm allowed to say that, a flavour of the sort of high precision manufacturing that.
You might bleep that out afterwards.
Oh, really? Oh, is that not allowed?
We've also been told by a previous guest on this pod that technocratic quangos veto growth, and listeners can guess which guest said that. Have any regulators tried to OBR your factory plans yet, and how did you push back?
Actually, I've got a hilarious one on this one. So as we were setting up the factory, obviously there's a lot of packaging, and then you get a lot of like rubbish, which again, didn't really think about, but actually you got a lot of rubbish, whether it's plastic packaging, cardboard, etc. So loaded that all in my car. There's a local skip. I was like, okay, just dump it at the skip. Drive to the skip, and then they asked, oh, are you a resident in the area or are you a business? And I was like, oh, business. And it's like, have you got your waste carriage license? And I'm like, what? A waste carriage license?
Oi, mate, have you got your waste carriage license?
You need to carry cardboard and plastic to, yeah. So that
Wait,
was
just to put it in your car. You needed this license.
to put it in the dump. Like I was 5 meters away. Did I circle around the block, come back with oh yes, I am a resident.
Yeah, I'm a resident.
No comment. Yeah. So, but outside of that, we've there's obviously important stuff to do with health and safety in a factory, which we're doing, and getting support on that front. But again, I think it's again a tyranny of planning as opposed to action, in that if you go and read up all the requirements and plan to the nth degree, there'll be no end to it. What you've actually got to do is start moving and start actually getting set up, and then as you're doing that, start going through all the process and being. But so far, again, that's the beauty of a smaller model and smaller multiple models, is that there isn't quite that regulatory burden once if you're on that smaller size.
Yeah, I imagine in a Gantt chart, it's hard to put allegedly or hypothetically lie to a council official.
As a former Treasury civil servant, I know how to.
You know how to talk to officials.
Yes, official speak.
All right, listeners, we will go for a break now. If you're enjoying the show, please share it on social media. We'll be back very shortly.
Welcome back. In the first half, we talked about the decline of Western manufacturing and the closing of the machine shops. And hopefully in the second half, we will cover its rebirth.
Alex, walk us through a customer journey from uploading their CAD file to shipping a flight-critical part. Where does Mason OS create the biggest time delta?
That's a really good question. That sounds like an investor question. Have you been prepped?
That's actually from our producer, Aaron. That is not from
Yeah,
me.
who is actually a founding engineer, who knows how these things work. Unlike Tom, who's a journalist, and me, who's a PhD.
It was like the first question was like, whoa.
No, I'm a Potemkin village interviewer.
So simple answer is across the whole of the flow. But we don't just stop at someone sending us a design for a part. It actually starts often much earlier, where even before a design for a part or a product is actually done, we can then feed back the learnings from the factory to actually make those designs fit for manufacturing. Because if you're a product business, let's say you're building a new type of direct air capture, making synthetic fuels, or if you're building a new drone, for example, there'll be a lot of requirements when you build. Those requirements are, size, weight, and power, duration time, et cetera, but then also manufacturing will need to be key, because if you're building a few prototypes, you want to be certain that you can scale up those prototypes into large production volumes. So that's where we come in. So we can feedback it early on in the design for manufacturing. So you're actually designing the parts so they can be manufactured faster and cheaply. And then it goes through the process of estimating time and cost to actually manufacture. Then it goes through the time and cost of actually manufacture the part. Then we program the machines to actually make those parts. And at the moment, we've got a kind of high mix, high volume. So that's where we're not doing lots of the same type, but we're doing lots of different types of parts. And then if we're doing some of the assembly as well, so we're not just doing some subcontract machining, we're also doing assembly of products as well for customers. We can then do that all within a time frame that is predicted and hits the time that we said we would. Because the problem with most factories is, like, you've had a lot of, digital twins or Industry 4.0, but actually most factories aren't anywhere connected in terms of the way they need to be to actually be able to predict production speeds, volumes, and output, because everything is connected with each other. To be able to quote a price and speed estimate, you need to know the utilization rate of your machines. You need to know your own supply chain and how fast they deliver and what's the frequency of the delays in their delivery. You need to be able to plan out your personnel and where they can work and what times they can work. You need to then actually program the parts, and actually one part can be made in many different ways, and there are iterations you need to do in all of that. So it's like a living, breathing organism, and like ultimately the factory is the product for us, and that's why we're spending so much time and effort building kind of the SOPs in this first factory.
And I'm interested, you say that you work with customers as they send you the part, and then you help them iterate on it and make it suitable for manufacturing. Definitely from my field, where if you have a cell that you want to scale up its production, people work with CMOs, and there's a real issue there with like tech transfer, right? Where you send them your strain and then they maybe scale it up, and then it's very hard if you then want to bring it in-house. Do you ever see companies as ever wanting to bring their manufacturing back in-house, or do you think that they will always keep working with you, so there's no risk of that like problem of tech transfer?
Yeah, we see exponential increase in the amount of product and parts that each business wants to work with us on. I'd say the best analogy for it is back in the early 2000s, every business would have to be running their own servers to run their websites, but then it became much more efficient to centralize that and high utilization, because if you go back, the pain of in-housing manufacturing is really painful. It's not just the capital expenditure to do it, but also the hiring burden to actually do it properly. But also, there is no end to the amount of in-housing you can do, because each of those in-house manufacturing steps has a supply chain in and of itself. And so it's like that tree of things you need to solve. Most businesses should focus on things that like make their beer taste better, which is designing better parts and then designing better products and selling those products to customers. The actual manufacturing can be done by us.
And at the moment, your factory is in an industrial estate, as you said. It's the sort of largest and last remaining industrial estate in London. Were you here? Did you set up here because it was in London, so you could get advantage of talent, or was it because of the sort of clustering effects with other similar businesses? For example, why did you not go out to, say, Sheffield or towards Milton Keynes for the F1 and things like that? Why did you choose London?
The rent must be so much cheaper here.
Yeah, exactly.
The rent must be the rent must be so much more expensive here.
We will eventually go out to everywhere. The reason why we started is that in London you have huge amounts of software and AI talent, which is a key part of kind of what we're building. And the other is just being close to customers as well, and just that wider kind of network. But like our model is, we haven't built a massive 100,000 square foot factory. What we do is we find existing industrial space that you can actually get for relatively good price as well.
And I mean, as you say, these are smaller factories, and then you plan to have them dotted across the country. So you raised 7 million from investors sort of across the UK and Germany, and from NSSIF. How do you convince them that sort of how do you convince national security money that like these distributed factories and this model was the one that you wanted to sort of use, and that the one that they should back?
I think fundamentally traction matters the most, and so with a relatively efficient use of capital, we were able to stand up a factory and start producing for customers. But I think the more important thing is actually like, what are the macro trends? And it's the same thing I was talking about with where the best talent actually wants to go work. It's at the kind of the bleeding edge of problems that are actually matter to people, whether it's national security or energy security or anything, or manufacturing. And ultimately, everything is downstream of where the most talented individuals go and spend their time. And so if that is the case, then if you're an investor looking for a return, you need to put your capital to work in places where the most talented individuals are going. And so what you're seeing in Europe, but you're also seeing it in the US, is a focus on whether it's European resilience, American dynamism, like the actual refocusing on things that really matter, and away from the almost that 2000 era of dating apps or kind of payroll software. It's not that I have anything against payroll software, I mentioned that twice now, but
Alex Fitzgerald doesn't like having his employees paid on time. You've heard it here first.
But what really matters is building really important products for not just defending first and foremost defending the country, but also actually projecting power and influence as well.
And you mentioned talent, right? Because you've got 12 employees here. What's your attitude on things that you have to bring in house versus what you'll just outsource and do effectively? Like, as you say, you target only the best people. Is 12 people minimal? Is this still a small team that is still doing a lot beyond what sort of it could be at a different firm with that number of people?
I think you can do a lot more now with a much smaller amount of people. Like the best size of a team is where you can share a pizza around or share a pie maybe. And actually, with some of the kind of the tools you have available now today, like. There's a tool called Cursor, which is I'm not sure you've heard it. It's like how you can build software much faster now. And
I built a website over the weekend, just like when I'd never built a website before using Cursor. I mean, it's astonishing.
Yeah. So the speed at which you can build, and almost like the best time now is to hit reset and start from scratch, because there is so much legacy in not just even just businesses which were started 3-4 years ago. And that legacy is like opportunity.
Speaking of, in another recent episode, we went to see Joseph Chen, who I think you know, at his Kaikaku restaurant. Well, the restaurant is Common Room, the business is Kaikaku, and in the back room, they have a kind of little shop of their own, and they iterate hardware, which they then use to kind of chop salads robotically multiple times a day with their downstairs 3D printer. So how tight is your CAD to chip loop? Are you iterating that often?
Yeah, every day, if not every hour, or every minute. Fundamentally, like how you build a great product is having engineers ingest pain and then output product.
How much pain do your engineers ingest?
I classify myself as an engineer as well, so I ingest pain as well. But it's fundamental. Like in my last business, in the broadband business, the best learnings were when engineers had to go answer the customer phones and then answer customer queries. I did that every week. And it's how you actually, it's all well and good having kind of sitting in your ivory tower and having kind of a grand plan to how you build X or Y product. But if it's much more efficient to move a button 20 clicks, it's much more, so you can send something to a customer much faster, that then increases the relationship and the better output for the end customer. So, yeah, it's about having that. That's critical, and that's how you build.
I suppose, though, you talk about the top talent. The top talent doesn't necessarily want to be answering the phones, right? So
I think that's wrong. I think that's again a culture problem. Everyone in the business has made parts here, whether you're a software engineer, whether you're doing finding customers. I think it's a cultural problem of a business.
I think, that was what I was going to say, right? Maybe you want to find the people who actually really care about it and are not just thinking about do the easy thing and deliver. That actually the real talent is the ones who care about it. It's a
millennial thing as well, right? Millennials just don't like picking up the phone. And we see this in journalism where younger staff don't want to pick up the phone and make a difficult call. But once you've done your first few calls to, bereaved relatives, that kind of thing, it becomes much easier.
Ingest pain, output product.
That's what we say. That's what we say.
And we've spoken in the past about the lack of large manufacturing companies that, in South Korea, we have these chaebols that are able to sort of draw in talent and be the place that all the ambitious young people want to go. Do you see that as the future of Isembard?
Yes, I see us as. We're already bringing some of the best talents from university. So we have someone starting in July who is probably one of the top engineers at one of the UK's universities. Built rovers for space, Formula cars, and would have been snapped up by Red Bull or gone into an equivalent role. But he's coming to work. It was a funny. We had an interview with him on the Wednesday. Then second or third interview on the Friday, we offered him the role. Then I think late Friday evening, we gave him a call, said, okay, are you happy with flying to Germany on Monday to help us deliver some stuff to customers? And he flew, and it was probably a great experience for him. So like, there's huge amounts of demand out there for talented engineers, and if you are a talented engineer and listen to this, email me.
And I think it's interesting when we talk about it becoming this vertically scaled and highly effective organization in Britain, because what these companies tend to do is they take over like a sector, right? Things like Samsung, for example, incredibly good at semiconductors and has basically cornered an area of the market where if you want to do semiconductors, you go to them and they are the people to do it. Do you think that Isembard can be that kind of comparative advantage for Britain?
Yeah, exactly. We are going to be the subcontract manufacturer for critical industries. So if you are a startup in defense or aerospace or energy, if you are an established prime, or even if you're government, you will come to us. There is no business that's doing that right now, and that's who will be.
Alex, the UK's production sector shrank 1.7% in 2024. Given your ambitious plans, how much of that could you claw back? Could you even put us into surfeit?
All trillion-dollar businesses in the world are based on the west coast of the US, apart from one, which is TSMC, or TSMC, which is in Taiwan. Europe has yet to build a trillion-dollar business. So Isembard's going to have a GDP-level impact on not just UK GDP, but global GDP as well.
On global GDP, what are you going to do with all that money and power?
Invest it into product.
Create shareholder value, yeah.
And still not answer the questions of our customers. Maybe we'll answer
But
the questions
you're going to
then.
run out of Western defence clients.
Satellites, space companies. So how I see it is we're starting in critical industries, defense, aerospace, energy. The global manufacturing sector is like trillions and trillions. But like there is no subcontract manufacturer. Like the best way to think about what we're doing is like the Foxconn to Apple is one way of thinking about it. But rather than just to Apple, it's to all the critical industries. And with that, you can build a very, very big business. And then maybe even eventually we start building our own IP and products.
And this is because your OS is just so much better than anyone else's. That's the sell. And you're more nimble because you can operate in
What
these
we're
warehouses.
effectively building is the world's most efficient factory, but it's a distributed factory.
I'd like to follow up what you say about these defense primes, and you're right about how a lot of companies and countries are waking up to the need to have this sort of resilience. You know, we saw with British Steel the risks that come when your sort of critical industries are foreign owned. Are you factoring in that there will be an increase in conflict and war over the next kind of decade? And do you think that is the creation of Isembard a response to that?
If you look at the first page of our investor deck, the headline is we have entered a multipolar world. And then the knock-on effects of that are an increased spending in critical industry spend, reshoring of supply chains, but also, crucially, as I said before, that makes a change on where the most talented individual engineers, especially in Europe, want to spend their time. I think Wall Street or Threadneedle Street has traditionally viewed production or business as purely a function of performance, and has not included like geopolitics in the equation, and that needs to be, and that's what's changing right now. But do I think there is going to be more conflict in the world, and it'll be in areas we don't yet know about or predict. It's just a fundamental nature of this is a fundamental part of human nature. And you need an industrial base. Like the reason it all came back to me like early on when we started Isembard is that everything does fundamentally come down to production. You're seeing it in Ukraine at the moment. I think they're producing about 2, 3, 4 million drones a year. It's now overtaken. At the start of the conflict, 80% of deaths were because of artillery. Now it's flipped the other way. 80% are through kind of uncrewed systems. So in the same way that when we transitioned from like coal to oil in our ships, from kind of wooden ships to metal ships, like technological change is happening. And if we're not... if we don't move fast enough with that change, we'll be left behind.
So we have to be agile, right? Because we don't know exactly what form that technology will take. Drones took a lot of people by surprise. We don't know what the next step change will be.
But still fundamental to all of it is production. And the ability to produce large amounts and crucially now varying amounts of of product across a wide area, and not just being risked in one single space. Like there's a great, if you go back to the history of Second World War, there's the scheme of like the shadow factories, British shadow factories, where you had kind of traditional big factories, but actually the rest, they were actually then copied and spread out with much smaller factories across the whole country to add resilience. You had similar, there's a great book from the Splendid and the Vile. It goes into a bit of the history of like Churchill and the kind of cabinet, but also a lot into Lord Beaverbrook and when he took over the Ministry of Aircraft Production. And actually what you had then was these centralized factories, which were then split up into hundreds of much smaller factories across the country. And you had, they were called Beaverbrook boys. They would, you'd park your car at night, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, and then your hubcaps would be gone because they'd taken the metal to put into their Spitfires. Or like a Dan Messerschmitt would then be, within 30 minutes after it hit the deck, fully stripped of all its wirings and metals and re-put back into the supply chains. So it's like that, it's a high throughput of, that drive and ambition needs to be there, and that's what we're hiring. That's what.
And it's like how, you know, the building of the Mosquito, right? We were able to build this all wood plane because we had the base of piano makers and luthiers who could then work with wood and produce this aircraft that was going so much faster than the.
Yeah. So to give one anecdote, there's a business which makes parts for a. I think I can say it.
Once again, the NDA foils us.
Almost for a consumer goods appliance, which is it's probably one of the most sold pieces of consumer goods, and there's a part in that which is also quite critical for an uncrewed aerial system, and they produce them at huge unit volumes in the UK. And then now potentially can be repurposed for multiple use as well.
I wanted to ask about, I mean, we already touched on British Steel, but obviously your business is the milling of metal into these precision parts. Are you concerned about the lack of ability to produce steel in Britain, or do you think that actually we're likely going to be able to produce steel, you know, get steel from our allies?
If you look at the stock of steel in a country kind of asymptotes away. And so you get, like there's a level of steel once you get to a certain amount which kind of just circulates, because steel can be recycled really easily. You get a circular motion of once you get enough steel in a country, you can keep on circulating, because anything that's not buried in the ground can then be recycled. So that's where, like, obviously electric arc furnaces and kind of the recycling still comes in. I think from an Isembard perspective, we're not just we're a subcontract machining and subcontract assembly business at the moment. Eventually we'll be getting into more manufacturing processes, and that's forgings, that's castings, that's like primary production as well eventually. But yes, like I think we need industry in this country, and anything that supports that is needed as well.
And do you think, we talked about Mason OS, do you think that you will keep this proprietary, or do you think that at some point you might open source it and it becomes something like Android, you know, the sort of middleware layer of manufacturing that allows other people to work on your systems, and you sort of become a maintainer of this?
Yeah, eventually, but that's definitely an opportunity. But what we're laser focused now is actually delivering it for our own factories. And then, as with anything, how you build a big business is by you don't just have one product line doing everything. You kind of expand, but expand at the right time.
And now that we've talked about the defense-related output of factories like these, I'd also be interested to know what kind of domestic or consumer tech could be made, or what kind of domestic and consumer tech could be manufactured at scale in a way that would improve the lives of Brits beyond simply defending them.
Yeah, so I mean, another great one is just electronics more generally. If you look at electronics, it's especially for consumer-grade electronics, really small, highly precision parts where you've got huge amounts of complexity and design and intent gone into the design of the products, but you need it in a really small form factor. Like again, if you look at the supply chain, I think I mentioned before, but the supply chain of Apple, there's about 100,000 CNC machines in that supply chain, and that's something that can again repurposed, and it's crucial as well.
And what if high precision engineering just became half as costly in this country? What would life look like?
Well, an Isembard factory in every town. But
Next to the small modular reactor.
exactly, yes, and then on the spaceships eventually as well.
Yeah.
But I think fundamentally it means the biggest thing that kind of pisses me off is seeing the most talented individuals wasting their lives in worthless pursuits. And once and you see it here, like actually action, if you build the culture where action is rewarded and incentivized, and actually the joy of action in and of itself creates the drive to get more stuff done, that's quite a powerful thing. And it means that, I mean, ultimately I see in the same way, if you look, there's a website called SpaceX Alumni, which is all the businesses that were founded from people who've worked at SpaceX, and everything moves in cycles. And the people who then join the business and are there from its founding to the first 5 years, then go and take those learnings and find their own businesses, which then create even more jobs, and then they create more jobs. And you're seeing a bit of that in Europe at the moment, because a lot of that has been maybe on the, I don't know, TransferWise or Skype or some of those early businesses, and now you're seeing it some more with like Octopus or Revolut or any of the other European businesses. They are budding off new entrepreneurs, often in like the areas or focus they've managed. So if you can found these new businesses which are actually really successful, the first and foremost thing is to, like, I disagree with the organizations, or especially like Quangos or any government thing. Governments don't change things. It's like people and fundamentally businesses which do. Like which government would have created like ChatGPT, for example, or whatever. And so what you need is really highly ambitious businesses to actually be successful, and not just raise a bunch of capital, but actually deliver product to customers, get those customers to really love that product and spend more money, and drive the flow of work to then generate huge equity in businesses, to then that budding off people who've gone through those businesses or customers of those businesses.
So I mean, basically what you're saying is government needs to get out of the way. What would you like to see in terms of policy that could remove barriers that would make life easier for you? Is that like an end to carbon tax kind of thing?
No, specific. It's financing of machine tools. So the real barrier.
He had this one fully prepared.
Yes, I have my policy recommendation for the Treasury in my pocket, and I might have I emailed it to them? I can't remember. So the barrier to entry for production is fundamentally the capital expenditure to buy expensive machine tools. So the more you can incentivize that, the better. So whether that's there's already actually some schemes out there, and actually this first machine was part financed by the UK government. So there are schemes out there, but we need to double down on that. And if you actually look at the history of like why did the Chinese manufacturing sector take off? Yes, wages were part of it. Yes, the supply chain was part of it. But fundamentally, the biggest impactor was government financing of machine tools. And it's actually like in the same way, instead of QE, we should do ME, manufacturing easing. That sounds a bit rap. There's a better way of describing it. But like we should pump billions into financing of machine tools. And that should be like, there's clever ways you can work it, but essentially reducing the capital expenditure and the operational expenditure of owning and operating these machine tools.
Well, do you think this is more important than making energy cheaper?
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I was going to say, do you think this is specifically something that should be focused on machine tools, or do you think this is a fact that because our banks are sort of more tightly regulated than those in America, so they have to keep larger cash
If you
reserves?
create incentives, banks will move. If you create incentives, banks will move.
Yeah.
If the government takes backstops or finances more of a machine tool, let's say a machine tool's £500,000. Like again, the reason why these machine shops are dying is because maybe they've lost a customer, but the debt financing on their machine tools doesn't change, and so they have to sell up, and they just sell their shop literally for parts. The barrier to entry is machine tools, because if you've got the capacity, like we've solved it, you see it. There's demand is not a problem. People need manufacturing. People want manufacturing, especially close to them. But the barrier is actually manufacturing capacity, and how you do that. And machine tools are critical because that's how you manufacture anything. It's like people, again, there's this like brain fog of people because they don't experience manufacturing, because we all live in our own bubbles, but they think of it as just, they look outside a factory which is PR'd well and they see a big building and they think that's manufacturing. Manufacturing is not those buildings. Manufacturing is in the supply chain. It's an assembly. But everything that's required to do that is, we could assemble a tank in the shop. We're not yet, but with a machine tool and some welding, what you need is like really what you need to support is those machine tools.
And you say that when there's the incentives, people will follow. At the moment, well, in the past, kind of talent has gone to software because it's easy to make money, and it's easy to, with some lines on a laptop, a lot of lines on a laptop, you can generate businesses that make billions, trillions. Do you think that now, has there been a sort of change in technology that means that manufacturing businesses could do that? Or do you think it's just like, because these factories are closing, there's just an opportunity?
I think there's, on both levels. On the software side, fundamentally, the barrier, the cost and speed of building software has collapsed. And so there is no real barrier to entry. And so what you're seeing is traditional on the investor side, people who've only ever invested in software businesses actually saying, okay, we don't see any barriers to entry. We need to now invest in stuff that is actually impacting the real world.
Do you think sort of software hardware has become a sort of marginal barrier now that is going to attract a lot of push?
It's also where, again, eat pain, output product. Where there's the biggest pain is also the similar pain for everyone else. And so if you can find the biggest pain, build a product to solve that pain, then like building factories is hard. Running factories efficiently is hard. Doing that with software is hard. Doing that with that can attract people, time, etc. is hard. But like we're eating that pain and we're outputting products.
And your vision, as you said, is for thousands of these shops, millions to carpet the world.
Not just this world.
Not just this world, but other. Well, you anticipate my question. What is the kind of world that you would like to see that you're contributing to building? Is it like a powerful Britain? Is it a humanity that terraforms Mars? What are your wildest industrial dreams?
I would like to see a global like spacefaring civilization where we're not just in one single small little blue planet. And I think that's within our grasp. I think first and foremost, I think the UK has this unique opportunity where others have gone down various routes. We have an opportunity to coalesce the best talent in Europe and actually in the US as well. I think there's just a level of ambition. Like if you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, we were 0.1% of global population and like land mass, and yet by the end of the 19th century, over 50% of all coal production, over 50% of all steel and iron, textiles, and this was that 0.1% of the population wasn't even in where most of the population was in Britain. Most of the population was in East Anglia and London, but the actual Industrial Revolution happened in the north of England, where you had kind of this unique convergence of culture, resources, timing, religion, ingenuity, drive. No one's got the answer. If you look at, there's a great series of lectures, it's on a website, in the kind of About Us page if you scroll down. But there's a great series of lectures of this UCLA professor going into like the history of it and why did it happen. Still no real answer. But what I'm trying to say here is that like the tyranny of low ambition will drive low output. It's about being ambitious and to grabbing the stars.
And you really care about Britain's future. You're a patriotic man. You talk about Britain's history as you have done this morning. How unusual, I mean, you're a reservist as well, if you don't mind our saying that. How unusual does this outlook make you among your peers who are CEOs in the tech sector?
Again, I think it's like this almost, it's like it's an unwritten thing that you don't hear about, but it is there. Like the amount of there's a software business, like a cybersecurity business CEO, which has raised a lot of money, and he's just exited, and he's like, you wouldn't think of him as a blue-blooded or red, white, and blue-blooded kind of patriot, but he's that's what for his next thing. He wants to go solve a problem which will help the UK national prosperity or security. So I think it is there. It's just been understated. I think, as with anything, reactions, like changes in one country have their reactions abroad. So whether it's like the new Trump administration then actually giving a wake up call is like the best thing. It's almost like it's the secret weapon for the UK in that it's awakening the lion.
Well, and I'd like to ask, because you have been a reservist and you worked in the Treasury, and now you're running with these groups of engineers. What could, if you have a young listener, a young engineer who's listening, what can they do to sort of build the skills to be the person who could either be in your position as CEO or one of your engineers who is, in a small team setting up a business that can potentially change the world?
It's a really good question. I think just experience stuff. It sounds quite like trite, but there's so much I don't know, but there's also so much I didn't know beforehand. And it's only by just being curious about everything. I think curiosity is the most important thing, and it's not a specific action or thing to go out and subscribe to this newsletter, but it's just curiosity. Curiosity about everything. Curiosity about how the world works. Curiosity about businesses. Curiosity about people. About sectors. About products. About just like let your curiosity run wild, and that will. And then if you've got a few neurons in your head, you'll find opportunity.
And what about your engineers? Do you have examples of like some of the incredible things that they've done that has kind of has been the path that has got them to being able to set up a factory from scratch?
Yeah, so we hire from some of the kind of most like talented like businesses in the world. So, for example, Tom, one of from our team, he worked at a company called Palantir in the UK and did some really important work there. I think he's also kind of a similar position to me, the whole like not talking about various stuff. So I'll leave it there. In terms of and then Rory, he kind of did his did undergrad at Oxford, then was at Imperial where he started his PhD, but then worked at a company called Alloyd. And so he started off as just doing was a materials engineer, started out and then worked at this spin out from the University of Oxford, which did like 3D metal printing and metallurgy. Started off as an engineer, but was so good at that, then actually transitioned to leading business development for them in Japan and set up their whole Japanese business. And now they've raised like a Series B or C from some big Japanese investors. And then Jack started off as a manufacturing engineer and design engineer with 3M, then eventually like machined medical products. So for like scoliosis and like actually stuff which has to be obviously even more so than aerospace, even more stringent in its quality management. And then actually his last job before coming to us was in the kind of the supply chain for ASML in the kind of semiconductor production space. So as with all of those are kind of fairly unique experiences. But what's driven each of them is the curiosity and like plus just working really hard. It's really there's nothing more important than that as well.
Do you see these traits in any other businesses like your own in the UK startup sector? Which do you most admire?
UK startup sector. So yeah, obviously Kakako, really like them. There's a company called Arondite, which is a new kind of defence technology business based in London. So Will and Rob, the co-founders there, are great. They're building essentially autonomy products for connecting robotic systems. What else? In the UK, there's an interesting business which is not public yet, but it's like based around the Cambridge area, and they're building some really cool products.
Oh come on, Cambridge area cool products.
Yeah,
throw us a bone, Alex.
They've I literally can't say anymore. They'll go. They told me they'll be going public in the next couple of months, but it'll be really you should get them on the pod. Who else? Is this a unique way of finding out our customers?
No. Oh, shit. No. Jigsaw identification. No.
Okay. given that we've been foiled in that on that avenue of attack, I suppose
Back to safer territory.
Exactly.
The Industrial Revolution.
MI5 should actually be quite pleased actually, because we think Russian spies haven't really got anything on our.
The GRU totally listens to our podcast. we're convinced. Alex, we all dream of a world where young Brits no longer want to be influencers and YouTubers. They want to do something sexy like industrial manufacturing. How do we make that a reality?
I think it's about shouting about the successes more and doing podcasts like this. I think, again, people only know what they know, and you need to get them to know about other things other than what's in their feeds. But I think there's a general appreciation of, I think fear is actually a good thing. And why do I talk about fear? Fear of, job insecurity from technology, and specifically on the traditional ambitious roles where people can work on. The speed at which you can produce a legal agreement now is 10 times what it used to be. The speed at which you can produce a financial model is 10 times now. The speed at which you can pull a presentation together and make it look pretty to a client is 10 times and much better done actually with software. So the fear of a traditional ambitious or professional role being lost will then drive people into actually reevaluating, what do we want to do in my life? Is there more important stuff? And if there are businesses there, the reason why we started is because there were no businesses there. But if there are businesses there where can find that best talent and collect them into a group which actually give them huge amounts of responsibility and ownership to go and execute, then those businesses will do really well. And that success will then drive more eyeballs onto those businesses to then spawn a load of other businesses onto them. What you need is a couple of massive successes.
Well, I mean, Alex, young teenagers are on their phones a lot, so maybe Isembard should invest in some sort of more TikToks of you, I don't know, dancing in front of your machine. Maybe that's the way to pull them in.
One way of doing it.
Well, I mean, I do charge a consultancy fee, so if you do take that on, my invoice will be in the post. I think we will wrap up there. Thank you very much, Alex, for speaking to us. Is there anything that you think people should read? They can read some of your work or what Isembard is putting out?
Yes, so we have a manufacturing manifesto on our website, so www.isembard.com. So that's Isembard with an E, Isembard. And it goes into the history of this is essentially my thesis on the history of the UK and the Industrial Revolution, where we've gone wrong and where there's opportunity for the future.
Well, young, budding lawyers, consultants, and doctors,
drop everything.
Drop everything. Go grab that dusty toolbox from the cellar, because otherwise, you'll be out of a job. There's a new business in town. Alex Fitzgerald, thank you very much for coming on.
Go forth and manufacture. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I'll use that line.